Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are today. I am pleased to welcome you today to our webinar that we've titled Policy Changes Needed to Accelerate Distributed Generation in Southeast Europe. My name is Albert Daub. I'm a program director at the United States Energy Association. USEA works closely with the United States Agency for National Development on an initiative called the Energy Technology and Governance Program, or what we call ETAG. ETAG works with the transmission and gas utilities in Southeast Europe and Eurasia on various transmission network planning, cybersecurity, market development, and also distribution issues. One of the initiatives under ETAG is a working group consisting of the distribution utilities in Southeast Europe that we call the Southeast Europe Distribution System Operator Security Supply Working Group. This working group is the author of the paper that we'll be presenting today. It's highlighting the challenges that DSOs face in accommodating an ever-increasing number of distributed generation into their networks as the countries strive to meet the renewable energy targets. And it also provides recommendations on how these challenges can be overcome to help them do this. Before we begin our program today, I am pleased to introduce Steve Burns, who serves as the Chief Energy and Infrastructure Bureau for Europe and Eurasia of the United States Agency for International Development. He is our main point of contact at USAID on this agreement, and he's going to be making some opening remarks. Steve?
Thanks, Albert. I really appreciate that, and I'll be really brief. I just wanted to offer my congratulations to you and to the group for the event today. When you and I and your colleagues at USEA started this working group back in 2013, I don't think we had envisioned quite where it would lead. We had hoped, right, but we hadn't quite internalized, that it would become so independent and would get to a point that it could start making policy recommendations. I would say that today is in a small way, it's a really important step. Okay, so the working group, it started to provide a forum to bring the distribution system operators together, and over the years, I think we've seen an esprit de corps develop. We've seen the participants become comfortable with one another, being willing to exchange information, and has worked on a lot of key issues. There've been a lot of firsts. I think it was the first consistent benchmarking of key reliability and economic performance indicators for distribution companies in the region. I think we started to see the reconstitution of emergency preparedness strategies, protocols for the sharing of resources, and now we're moving into issues related to distributed generation. And it's a consumer-driven work group. So an important point to colleagues that are listening that aren't part of the working group is USA does not drive this agenda. USA provides a platform. We provide resources to bring expertise to the region, but the agenda is set by the United States Energy Association and by its partners within the working group. Okay, and as a donor, I think we like to count things, okay? And so just based on what I highlighted already, the working group, the investment alone is justifiable. You look at expertise. We have EVN from Austria. We have a lot of U.S. utilities: American Electric Power, CenterPoint Energy, Tucson Electric Power. I'd like to highlight and maybe thank Charles Bayless, former CEO of both Illinois Power and Tucson Electric Power. And he's currently on the board of directors, I understand, of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. He regularly shares his experience. I think today we have Chris Lindsay from Tucson Electric Power will be speaking. Thanks to Stefan Peter from EVN Macedonia, who's just been very active in the working group. It's this sort of engagement from experts, that we want to see. But the most important thing for me today, or again, is moving beyond the counting into just establishing, I think, a groundwork. Okay, so distributed generation, it's an important issue. Okay, it has an issue. It's an energy security issue. Distributed resources bring greater reliability. It's a climate change issue, right? As we look to integrate more clean energy into the network. Okay, and what we're seeing is the distribution companies not just accepting a top-down approach, not just accepting following a direction, but taking a step back and looking how to operationalize, policies above them, and to make recommendations for policies for things that could help them and could move the region forward. Not just accepting again that top down structure. And the thing at USAID, and the reason I wanted to offer my congratulations is this is what we want to see. We want to lay that framework, and it's we see the working group growing beyond that initial direction, and again, my congratulations, and I look forward to listening in today and discussing the policy recommendations and hearing what the experts have to say. So with that, Albert, I turn it back to you. And again, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you also for all your support over the years on this program. We have an excellent series of speakers this morning, and the first one up is going to be Minea Skok. She's from the Energy Institute Hrvoje Požar, which is based in Croatia. EIHP is the acronym. They serve as the primary technical consultant to this working group and has been since the beginning. And they are what we call the technical engine behind the work that's done through this working group. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I turn it over to Minea. Please feel free to use the Q&A button to put in your questions. We'll go through all of the presenters first, and at the end, we will turn it over to Charlie Bayless, who will serve as the moderator for the Q&A following the presentations. So Minea is going to provide an overview of this position paper and the challenges and recommendations. So I will turn it over to Minea now. Thank you, Minea.
Okay, so do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to extend a warm welcome to this webinar. My name is Minea Skok, and as Albert said, I'm working at the Energy Institute Hrvoje Požar based in Zagreb, and today I will be the voice of DSOs from the Southeast Europe. On behalf of the Southeast DSOs, I will be talking about the policy changes that we think are needed to accelerate the distributed generation here in Southeast Europe. The purpose of today's presentation is actually to present you the content of the position paper, which summarizes the findings of the two working group studies on the DGs, and also provide some recommendations on the topic of the integration of distributed generation into the distribution networks, and finally highlight some of the key data points which are relevant for the region. We started working on this position paper a year ago in November last year, and after several rounds of revisions and reviews, we finally, the final content of the position paper was unanimously approved by the working group members in July this year. And here we are today. We would like to share it with you. If you ask yourself, is it now the optimal timing for the position paper? And that's something that we did. The facts are here that speak in favor of it. Here on the slide, you can see one graph that we actually took from the IRENE Renewable Energy Market Analysis from 2019. And you can see here that apart from the large hydropower plants that were built several decades ago, these are large units, the renewable energy technologies like wind, solar, bioenergy, and geothermal are just started to take off. And these technologies that will be connected to the distribution network, such as solar, bioenergy, geothermal, their share in the total installed capacity of sources here in the region is below 0.5%. So we can conclude that deployment of the DGs and renewable energy technologies is still in an early stage. And on the other hand, countries here aim to align themselves with EU commitments to achieve renewable energy shares. Governments are setting new targets, they are formulating long-term strategies, define the support schemes, and also this is also supported by the shrinking costs of renewable energy technologies like solars and energy storages. And also what is even more important for the distribution networks is that new European Union directives promote decentralized structures. This means that these large fossil fuel power plants will gradually and slowly be replaced by the generation across many smaller plants and a better generation on business sites and residential properties. And a large share of these power plants, smaller power plants, actually will be connected to the distribution networks. And DSO here in the region are actually aware of what the future brings. We know that there is a lot of good things that the renewable technologies at the DGs might bring, and we want to take not only to the environment and the society, but also to the power system. And we want to take an active role and contribute to this transition. But the fact is, as in the rest of the European Union, these distribution networks were not originally designed with the intention to integrate distributed generation prosumers and to these the bidirectional power flows. What is even more specific for this region is that all the DSOs share the need for a through modernization of their networks. Considerable assets are due for the retirement within a decade. And therefore, for us, it's of utmost importance to clarify all the critical aspects of DG integration. And because if integrated properly, DGs will help to make tomorrow's energy system more sustainable. But if integrated badly, DGs will increase the risk of outages and probably raise the cost for final customers. Before I carry on with my presentation further with the recommendation and findings of our position paper, just to be on the same ground, here on the same page with the terms, here are the two definitions of distributed generation and also prosumers. By distributed generation, we mean power generation units that are connected directly to the distribution network, not the transmission, just distribution, and which are producing and then selling its produced electricity, which constitutes their primary commercial or professional activity. On the other hand, prosumers are consumers, which have decided to install the production units within their premises and then to produce, consume, or store this energy within their premises. So this self-generated electricity, the excess power, can also be sold to the suppliers or on the market. But what is important, these activities do not constitute their primary commercial or professional activity. They are installing such a production unit with the desire to cut their costs and also to secure their energy supply. So before I go into the gist of this presentation, I will just give you some background information about the DG landscape here in the region. At the end of 2019, we had 3,400 DG units already in the system, which is not high. And you can see that in a 5 years period, average annual increase was around 3,000 units per year. And this region, or actually the position paper, spans over 7 countries and 10 distribution system operators. These numbers are not high at the moment. Over the 5 years period, the figures for the different renewable energy technology doubled. You can see that the solar increase is still very modest. Only the biomass is somehow specific due to the very beneficial subsidies. And here are given the numbers of DGs in the region differentiated by technology, and for each DSO, you can see that the leader in the region is actually Croatia due to the solar power plants. And here are the data related to the capacities of these DGs. We already have 1600 megawatts in the system. In 5 years period, this means average annual increase slightly below 200 megawatts, primarily due to the hydropower plants additions. And here is the same data for 2019. You can see the numbers differentiated per technology and for each DSO. And normally you can see that hydropower is the most deployed technology, which is somehow explainable because hydropower plants are regarded as the mature technology. We have considerable experience with this technology from the large units especially, and they're perceived as less expensive than the solar and wind are. Their production in 2019 was 3.7 terawatt hours, which covered around slightly below 5% of the gross distribution system consumption, by which I mean losses plus end customers consumption, which is not high. And this might give us perspective, some sort of perspective that the impact of such DG units, it's not so high on the distribution system at this moment. But therefore, for this illustration here on the slide, we have for each DSO ratio of rated capacity to the minimum demand of the DSO as a whole. And you can see that this low share of DGs already, some of the systems might have high impact because, for example, in Albania, this ratio is already for a system as a whole 56%. In some of the regions, the distribution areas for some of the feeders, these ratios can be even higher, which leads us to conclusion that there is, if the distribution networks are not properly dimensioned, that there is a likelihood for DGs to be curtailed in certain periods of time, which is not desirable neither for DSOs nor for the DG owners. And if we want to be prepared for the momentum of the renewable energy technologies which are in front of us, DSOs have to make a substantial investment to support this momentum in the future. And now I come to the third and final part of my presentations. I want to present you and share our thoughts with you regarding the position paper and 11 key findings and recommendations from the position paper. I will start with the first. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentations, networks were not originally designed to handle a significant amount of generation. Most of the general problem here in the region is the aging distribution infrastructure. Majority of assets were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So far, we have been able to deal with the increasing amount, with the rising volumes of DGs. But if we want to realize the renewable energy targets in the future, these targets may fail due to insufficient distributed grid capacity. But not only the DGs are, this development is not only driven by the DG installations. We have issues related to the uneven consumption trends, like the population migration from the rural to urban areas, and also very stricter and stricter regulations of security of supply. This is all pressing us to undertake costly investment cycles. Therefore, we recommend to have a predictable, stable, and transparent regulatory framework enabling full cost recovery and access to the credit with accrued credit rating, and also capital markets, which are needed to fund the DSO investments. Here on the slide, you can see one graph that is taken from our benchmarking report, which gives an average age of transformers for each DSO. You can see that if we take especially into account that the life expectancy of transformer is 40 years, you can see here that the average age of transformer in some of the DSO is 35 years. So the general problem is the aging distribution infrastructure. Now, the second finding is related more to the network tariffs. We all know that the network costs are capacity driven, determined by the peak demand. Here is one data that is taken from the Energy Community Report, where it states that the fixed cost in the DSO's total regulatory approved revenue is around 80%. On the other hand, distribution tariffs are primarily based on the volume of electricity that is passed through the network. Here on the slide, you can see one example of the total revenue of the Croatian DSOs. And the blue part is related to the energy component, the orange to the demand, capacity or connection power. And you can see that for the majority of customers, these are low voltage customers like households and low voltage commercial, that the share of energy component is over 80%. So the same is in the rest of the DSO in the region. So the average of fixed and capacity components is under 35%. Therefore, we advocate the gradual transition toward more capacity tariffs or two-part tariffs, like we have for larger customers that already have for example, in Croatia, these are in a red tariff model, which already have 50% on the demand component of the tariff, because they are better suited to account for the impact of the prosumers as well. Net metering, another challenge. Here in the region, we have low retail electricity prices, and we are aware that there are very limited incentive for self-consumption here. Therefore, countries are opting for introducing the net metering in order to boost the prosumers. However, such arrangements allow customers who also generate to virtually consume their self-generated electricity at any time. And we think that net metering is detrimental to the DSO revenues, and that such should be avoided in the current volumetric tariff construct. But if necessary, to boost the initial installation of solars at the customer's premises, that then just used in some transitional phase, and very important to be limited to the very small scale installations, like for example, the caps should be around 10 to 11 kilowatts. With also yearly system quotas, for example, we have such an approach in Slovenia, 10 megawatts each year. And we also advocate to allow only the real-time netting of withdrawals and ejection, like hourly. And if, in our opinion, if we want to make these investments economically viable for the prosumer, it's better to consider investment aids than to use the net metering. One more thing about the prosumers. Prosumers contribute less to the grid cost recovery. Why? Because they are not obliged to pay for the use of system, for the self-consumed and also electricity which is injected back into the system. So on the other hand, prosumers remain connected to the network for a backup service in case the generator fails. For example, if it's a cloudy day, the distribution system is then used to cover their consumption. So what we think is that we should prevent that this virtual storage capacity of distribution network is available to the prosumers free of charge. The prosumers should pay their share of the network and other system costs, for example, by the introduction of this capacity component in the network tariffs. Otherwise, the prosumers' costs will be shifted to the other consumers which did not decide to install the solar panels. A few words about G-charge. Here in the region, Southeast DSO do not charge DGs for network users. DGs only pay for the connection and do not participate in covering the network costs. The only exception is Montenegro, which introduced the distribution system charges for producers this year. And on the other hand, it is not likely that the fixed network costs will decrease with the DG integration, because grid must cover the peak demand when there is no local production. Furthermore, these variable renewables require a new grid investment in advanced technologies due to their variable production, like grid monitoring due to the better observability in the network, and automation as well. So we also understand it's not easy to allocate these additional operating costs to the DGs, and therefore we advocate to use the user system codes should be either socialized to the network's users, either or to partially allocate it to the generators. And we are actually in favor of the second approach, because if it's designed adequately, it could provide clear signals, price signals to the DGs for the efficient system use, for example, to address the losses in the system. DGs and prosumers, because they are not charged for the use of distribution system, do not have incentives to use the grid in the most economically efficient way. This fact, and also subsidy schemes like net metering and reimbursements for the electricity that is fed back to the grid, lead to over-dimensioning of on-site generation. Here on the slide, you can see a different impact of the one building with solars with a low rated and high rated power onto the distribution system. Subsidies and reimbursements for the excess power that is fed back into the grid might incentivize the building to install higher rated solar panels. But if the electricity produced is not consumed in the neighborhood, it contributes to the network losses and also requires excessive investment in the network. Or if there is not enough investment in the network, then it can lead to the network congestion problems with exceeding the voltage limits and also thermal levels. Therefore, we advocate that the network tariff should be designed to encourage the most technically economical efficient use of the existing infrastructure. In other words, to somehow incentivize the balance between the production and consumption and to reduce the peak power flows in the network. And not only that the distributed generation and prosumers should help, also the other network users like customers should be motivated to shift their peak energy use to non-peak hours. In other words, the widespread deployment of DG, especially renewables with a variable production, will lead to operational challenges. Therefore, we think that also the customers should be more active, should be motivated to load shifting activities for improved self-consumption, by which I mean consumption behind the meter, but also, if beneficial for the system, provision of flexibility services. And this is something that could be accomplished by the usage of the advanced technologies like energy management system, home automation, energy storages, and other advanced options. And this leads me to the advanced distribution management strategies. Here in the region, DSO do not rely on services provided by network users as a feasible alternative to the network investments. Such traditional approach will result in a large amount of total network capacity added, and that will be required only for a few hours per year. And in line with the new EU legal framework, integration of renewable requires provision of new services and more advanced distribution management strategy. We are aware of that. And we want to embrace an active role in the implementation of the new network management strategies. But we require to gain the confidence by piloting, testing new technology, demonstration projects. And also we have to have incentives with allowed revenues to deploy these new technologies like smart meters, widespread SCADA systems, IT and communication infrastructure, sensors, and so on. And the final part, the last three recommendations are dealing with the connection procedure. Connection charge is the one-time payment and primarily based on the hosting capacity of the existing network here in the region, because we are the deep connection approach prevails. This is approach which is traditionally used in the region because the DGs do not pay for their use of network system. And we know that investment would like to have a shallow approach. But we think that the socialization of connection cost up until the moment that we introduce the G charge should not be permitted. And especially bearing in mind that if adequately designed, deep connection charging provides appropriate and harmonized locational signals to the DGs to connect where there is enough connection costing capacity for connection and also close to the load centers. Even though this can be regarded as delay in access to the DGs, DSOs must authorize the installations and connections due to the public safety requirements, and also conduct a grid connection study to determine the optimum connection point and necessary reinforcement. And this can be cumbersome and time consuming, we know that. And there is definitely a potential for the connection procedure improvements. Lessons learned from the past are key for improvements, and it will help us in our endeavors to make it, to improve it. We recommend to focus on simplified methodologies for smaller DG units, on the transparency and public notices practices like publishing the data on the hosting capacity in the system, and also pending requests for the connection. One option also to consider is related to the cluster reconnection requests. For example, the idea is to organize some sort of rounds of group processing of a connection request, so that approximately and simultaneously and closely located DG requests are submitted for an aggregated grid connection analysis, causing that all DG share necessary informations. So that, in other words, to prevent that available hosting capacity is given to the DG investor on a first come, first basis. And the last finding is also related to the connection procedure. Once approved a connection to the DG, DSO is certifying that is able to accommodate the DG onto its network. There is absolutely no requirement for the applicant to build the DG in a timely manner, if at all. And this can result in unnecessary grid investments and backlogs in the connection Reg 4. Therefore, we recommend to impose enforceable deadlines to ensure that applicant builds their facilities in a timely manner in order to prevent these virtual situations. Virtual situation is a situation in which proportional grid could theoretically allow connection, but cannot practically proceed because whole capacity is reserved by the DG not yet connected. And here on the slide, you can see one proposal from the Albanian DSO on the deadlines. This means if DSO is not built and put into operation up until this deadline, then he will have to apply once again for the connection. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for the listening.
Thank you, Minea. That was an excellent and very thorough overview of the position paper. I just want to emphasize again that that paper represents a unanimous support by the members of the working group and is basically their recommendations that they're sharing today. And I also want to thank the Institute for all of the effort they've put in developing that paper with the members of the working group, and for all of the work the Institute's done with the working group over the years on the various studies that's been going on since 2013. Our next speaker this morning is Stefan Peter. Mr. Peter is the Chief Executive Officer for EVN Macedonia, and I'm really pleased that he's here today to present a voice from one of the utilities in the region on these issues that we're talking about today. EVN Macedonia has been a strong supporter of the working group from the beginning. I know that I've had several dinners with that Mr. Peter has hosted over the years in Skopje for our meetings, and I'd like to turn it over to him today. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you so much. Minea, congratulations to your key findings. You did an excellent presentation, and actually my next words are completely obsolete because it will just confirm what you have said before. I'll share a presentation with you. It's not so much content inside, but at least, wait a second. So you might have it already now. Okay, guys, I'm Stefan. I'm the CEO of EV Macedonia. And thanks to Albert, and thank you very much for having here one of the smallest DSO entities on the Balkan, for giving up, for giving us the possibility to have a speech here and to confirm what this working group has already established. And once again, congratulations to the colleagues. You're all here now, and you did an excellent job. EVN is present in North Macedonia since 2006 by acquiring 90% of the shares of the state-owned company. Originally, we came from Lower Austria in Austria. Our core business here in Macedonia functions like electricity distribution. We have a power network with more than 8,000 transformer stations and more than 2,000 kilometers of low voltage and high voltage grid. We also do the electricity supply. We supply over 800,000 customers, business customers, household customers in the regulated market, but also in the open market. And we have a bit of electricity production, like 11 small hydropower plants with an installed capacity of almost 50 megawatt. And since last week, one photovoltaic solar power plant with 1.5 megawatt. Our revenues in 2020 will reach approximately 400 million euros. And we have approximately something like 2,000 employees. Talking about Southeast Europe region, I say we have here a significant renewable energy potential. But yet it's not sufficiently exploited at all. At a certain extent, maybe the hydro potential is, but these are mostly larger plants constructed decades ago. Non-hydro renewable sources have always been observed carefully. Recent trends and decreasing costs of other renewable technologies attract some investments in this field. And this is also why EVN Macedonia took a 1.5 megawatt solar power plant into operation, just as I mentioned the other week. But it's still a lot to be done. I'd like to start with my brief overview of some of that potential. In North Macedonia, for instance, the country is very much dependent on its thermal generation plants. In 2019, more than 75% of all electricity produced came from one coal and one gas-fired power plants. So we can say not very much distributed at all. Additional 15% come from large hydropower plants. The remaining 10% is a mixture of various renewable sources, mostly small hydropower plants and a bit of wind as well. The share of photovoltaics in the overall electricity production in the country was insignificant, low, with 0.5% only. In terms of the installed renewables, at the moment, there are about 570 megawatt in renewable plants operational. Most of this capacity, about 350, is due to the bigger hydropower plants, all constructed in the very past. Some small hydro plants constructed in the recent past also contribute with around 50 megawatt. Additionally, since introduction of the feed-in support in 2006, we have approximately 100 preferential small hydropower plants which became operational, and they have an installed capacity of 90 megawatts, something like that. One big wind farm there is as well, with almost 37 megawatt, and something like 7 megawatt is coming from plants exploiting biogas from biomass. So photovoltaic, on the other hand, participates only with less than 25 megawatt, although it's well known that the country has many sunny days each year, around 250. So the focus here is obviously put to exploit this possibility. And there is an ambitious midterm target set by the government of North Macedonia to reach 400 megawatts of photovoltaics within a decade. This goal is supposed to be reached by construction of larger solar power plants, but prosumers are expected to have a significant role as well. In fact, the Prosumers are expected to contribute with about 40% of the target. Currently, there are less than 10 megawatts operational prosumers. This means that the prosumer concept have to go quite popular, and it will need all of us being involved to implement this concept. The consumers become active consumers. We are all witnessing the increasing trend of mounting photovoltaics on rooftops. Germany was a role model here and substituted these investments a lot. This is also why 1/3 of the electricity bill in Germany goes into these subsidies. However, I believe that the overall self-consumption concept, especially in Southern Eastern Europe region, is not completely understood by the consumers yet. Consumers have to become aware of their new role of this concept. They are no longer just consumers getting electricity from the network. They could be much more than that. There are many possibilities for consumers to actively participate in the electricity sector. For example, by self-producing certain quantities, consumers need less energy from the system. Furthermore, the excess of the produced quantity they can sell to electricity suppliers. In this way, they contribute to the overall electricity supply. Their individual share might seem neglectable, but mass development leads to significant quantities at the end. Finally, consumers also offer services to DSO in network management by customizing their consumption behavior. The latest, however, implies smart technologies and therefore is expected in later stages of the development, especially in SEE region, simply because of the lack of money for financing. I just want to remember at that point that compatible to the lowest wages in Europe, the SEE region also have the lowest electricity costs. And by that, it's needless to say that it's a political issue as well. Here in North Macedonia, the regulator recently increased the tariffs by approximately 7%, but which led to month-long protests of some citizens. Back to the prosumers. Of course, possibilities comes with obligations, which is another aspect of consumers' role in this rather new environment. For instance, a prosumer have to collaborate with the DSO during the installation of the production units. The DSO must have an information about installation of production units in its network. It will not just only help him in planning and managing the distribution system, it has also a huge safety aspects. And second point, the consumer needs a bidirectional electricity meter from the DSO to actually become a prosumer. Otherwise, he will not be able to get compensated for the electricity fed into the network. It is actually in his favor to have a bidirectional meter, even if he does not want to become a prosumer, but it's only interested, and if he's only interested in producing energy for the own needs. I'll give you the reason for that. We have detected consumers who installed production units without getting in touch with the DSO. Such consumers have regular one-way electricity meters. This meter is not able to register the excess electricity fed into the network. But heavily, even more, instead, this electricity meter is registered, this electricity by the meter is registered as a consumption. So the consumer is charged by the supplier for his consumption, but also for the production fed into the network, which is of course not good. In our case, we are proactively contacting consumers and resolving this issue by legalizing their connection. But there is many more on the network than we find, and we are also aware about that. They are not utilizing possibilities, but even the more they are suffering consequences. This is why I believe that raising consumers' awareness is of crucial importance for a success story. After consumers become fully aware, we can further promote their role. I say the market has to be organized, before the market will be opened. Another example, what was happening in Germany right now, actually, in relation to the failure to register prosumers appropriately. Currently, all power generation systems in Germany must be entered in a so-called market master data register. And very soon, because the transition period ends on January 31st, 2021. If you fail to register, you'll no longer receive feed-in tariff for your solar system. That could affect thousands of solar system owners in Bavaria alone. All German owners of solar systems, battery storage systems, block-type thermal power stations, wind energy systems, or even emergency power generations should act, because the Association of Bavarian Energy and Water Management is sounding the alarm. According to research by the association, only around 2/3 of the 600,000 distributed generations in the Free State of Bavaria are in the Market Master Data registered already. The Market Master Data Register itself, it's a comprehensive online system. It's a register in which all electricity generating systems that are connected to the power grid must be entered, even small plug-in solar devices as well. It is intended to collect as much information as possible on the electricity market in a larger database and make it available to the public and to the DSOs. This should help to better balance supply and demand in the energy market, but it could have been done from the very beginning, not just now afterwards. The deployment of renewables is more than just construction and operation of renewable plants. Generally speaking, it's not just about construction and operation of a renewable power plant. The big issue here is the actual integration of the plant in the distribution system. The questions arise, is there sufficient capacity in the respective distribution network? How will the operations of the power plant influence the electricity delivered to the consumers? It is for sure that uncontrolled development of production units will disturb the electricity delivery. There will be periods when voltage is disturbed, or network protection settings will cause interruptions in delivery. This is why DSO has to be deeply involved in the process. The involvement will enable DSO to plan the network development properly. It will also enable DSO develop effective network management strategies, which of course is urgently needed. For the SEE region, integration of widespread renewable generation is a major challenge. First of all, the distribution networks are in worse shape than the ones in Western Europe. Especially in remote areas, there are often insufficient capacities in the existing network, and here it's inappropriate to accept the new generation units. This is a result of chronic lack of investment in the infrastructure in the previous years. Regardless the investment made in the recent years, the situation is not the best at all. And the necessary funds for the investment are massive. The conditions of the existing network puts the incumbent stakeholders in a situation to be more focused on their traditional roles. So they are rather focused on accepting new consumers, decreasing electricity losses, maintenance, instead of the emerging role as a promoter of the new concepts. Additionally, the affordability of the needed smart technologies is much lower than in Western Europe or in the US. In fact, this is one of the reasons for the insufficient investment in the first place. And DSOs sure need such technologies to manage the network conditions created by widespread renewables deployment. Faced with the affordability constraints, DSO cannot act proactively in the rollout of smart technologies. They will certainly need great support to do that. Also, we have to keep in mind that most of the countries in SE region are transposing the EU regulations. their energy sectors are in a stage of reforms. This means that their regulation is frequently changing, and this is also relevant for the regulation related to the renewables. The good part in it is that once developed rules and procedures could be revised afterwards if shown inefficient. I can give you an example in North Macedonia, as I believe it is in the most countries in SCE region. Consumers do not participate fairly in costs sharing of network services. This is because the network usage costs are paid fully on basis of the volume of the electricity consumed. So by reducing their consumption, prosumers take less costs of the DSO as well. And this is on behalf of other consumers which do not have installed photovoltaics. And some of them are vulnerable customers. Here we come to an important point. That means that the tariff system needs to be changed to provide greater fairness before distributed generators are promoted. Changing terms and conditions create great deal of uncertainty and at a certain extent discourage actions for both the renewable producers and the system operators. But it is a process that all the SCE countries have to go through, and we can only try to make this process as smooth as possible. Market access to overall renewable generation should incentivize deployment. Regardless of their size, all renewable producers should be enabled to participate to the electricity market in a certain way. This is relevant also for the prosumers, but they usually access the market through their suppliers. It may imply some changes in the existing market designs, which is always not the easiest task. In our case, for instance, this functions in a way that the consumer to become a prosumer has to go to the open electricity market. Then he can sell the excess production to his supplier, and that brings value for the investment. It surely makes it more feasible. I believe that this possibility is very important for the future development of the prosumer concept. Market access is important for the larger renewable producers as well. They have to be able to offer and sell their electricity production. This is because most of them do not have guaranteed power purchase agreements. In North Macedonia, only preferential producers, those under the feed-in regime of the past, have guaranteed agreements for sale of the production. It is procured by the electricity suppliers according to their market share. But for the rest, which do not fulfill the preferential criteria, they have to manage on their own. And if we consider the volatility of their products and the immatureness of the market, it's not easy to find a buyer. Therefore, they have to be supported by access to organized markets under convenient conditions. On their electricity sale could be guaranteed by the authorities. However, in order to be attracted to build plants, investors have to know that they will be able to sell their production once the plant becomes operational. Another option to enhance the possibilities for sale of produced renewable energy is to introduce so-called aggregators. Such aggregators will be obliged to overtake the produced energy from renewable producers and then to sell it to the open market. It's important for this concept to be functional in practice. In North Macedonia, the energy law defines a so-called virtual producer. Its obligation is to aggregate renewable production and act as a larger electricity producer. However, I can confess it's not operational yet. Finally, the DSO is much more than a distributor of electricity. In this rapidly developing concept, DSO have to strive to move from their traditional role towards the new emerging roles. Before, the main focus of the DSO was put on expanding the network and the reliability of electricity delivery. But now they must adapt to deal with the growing trends. For instance, to be able to manage the volatile system load, the DSO has to develop an effective network management strategy. And the loads are highly affected by the renewable production. Furthermore, both prosumers and renewable producers should be involved in the network operations. They can offer system services by adjusting their production or consumption regime according to the DSO needs. For the prosumers, they may be required to shift some of their consumption from peak hours to non-peak hours. This is especially possible if they also possess a storage device, like a battery or even the mobile batteries in electric cars. For the overall success of the self-consumption and the renewable concept, it is essential that the same to be promoted by the DSOs. DSO may act to enhance their roles by involving them in daily operations. By implementing effective supplier switching process, the DSO supports the market access to the prosumers. Data management and transparency is another very important DSO role. Producers and prosumers must be fully aware of their behavior so that they can adjust as needed. To be able to promote the concept, DSO has to consider deployment of smart technologies. In SEE region, limited resources of DSO are mostly used for network development and reinforcement. Smart grid cannot be developed overnight. It's a long-term process. The uptrending trends on the other side cannot be ignored as well. The sooner the preparation starts, the sooner the effect will be felt. And the renewables and prosumers will get their urgently needed support. But as I always say, before I start the journey, I need to see where am I now and where do I want to go, and then define the way there. But before I start walking. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for providing the experience of a DSO in the region and correlating and providing real experiences for the recommendations and challenges put in the position paper. Just a quick housekeeping thing. Again, we're going to save the Q&A until after our next presenter. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask your questions. Our next, last but obviously not least speaker is Chris Lindsay. He's the Director for Transmission and Distribution at Tucson Electric Power, based in Arizona. And if you are familiar with the state of Arizona, solar energy is a very significant portion of their generation in the state. They have incredible sunny days and hot weather there. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris to provide his experiences from utility in the United States. Thank you, Chris.
You bet. Thank you, Albert. Yeah, you got that right. Sun is an abundant resource for us here in Arizona, and we've been looking to take advantage of it and only do more. So thank you all for the opportunity this morning to share some of our experience with distributed generation and renewables. And I have to say, Manea and Stefan and everybody else that's been involved in researching distributed generation and how it may impact your rates and your system. You guys have done a great job, been very proactive in identifying what issues exist, you know, what things need to be addressed and how to overcome them to make integration successful. And I think that that's really important to mention. You know, that's what we're here to do, take advantage of this resource, integrate it properly, and improve system reliability while we do it. So, you know, that's a lot of how we've been trying to approach things here in Arizona and at TEP. So let me get this, I believe. believe I'm sharing the presentation here. So I'll just get to it. Just being respectful of everybody's time here. So we're going to talk a little bit about our experience with distributed generation, mostly over the past 10 years. I got involved in the DG side of things, mostly from a technical perspective in 2010. And that's really where and when the adoption of distributed generation really started to take off in Arizona. And I just want to clarify real quickly, trying to align myself with the last two presentations. As I talk about distributed generation, it's mostly related to what Manea and Stefan were referring to as the prosumer. So we kind of consider or discuss that as customer-sided generation. You know, solar, mostly 99% is all solar, rooftop, parking structures, things of that nature. We love our covered parking here in Arizona. So that's all installed on the customer side of the meter. We do have other utility scale, we call them utility scale facilities that have direct connection. And we don't quite refer to that as distributed generation. So just trying to level set on the definitions there. So we'll talk about our experience with interconnection requirements, something Manea touched on. It's a big deal from my side of the house. And also discuss the history of our renewable energy standard, the tariff side of things, and our experience with net metering. So just a real brief overview of Tucson Electric Power. So we are owned by Fortis. We were acquired a number of years ago. Our service territory is just shy of 1,200 square miles, 432,000 customers. So we're not a incredibly large utility by any means. We kind of consider ourselves a medium-sized utility, but we do have at this point over 27,000 distributed generation or prosumer customers. So that ranges from a very small residential type system all the way up to multi-megawatt facilities at say a large distribution center. Some of the local college has a big facility, things of that nature. We set a new peak load this year, 2,433 megawatts. So we're pretty proud of that, but it was a hot summer to get there. So definitely a trade-off. And if you look at how much of that 27,000 customer capacity adds up to, roughly 460 megawatts. So we're getting there. We're really making this happen. We're integrating the solar on the customer side. Also, something to mention, this hasn't quite been approved yet at the commission level. We report up to our Arizona Corporation Commission here in Arizona for approval, but we've proposed as we move forward over the next 15 years to construct and integrate another 2,000 megawatts of I'll call it utility scale. So this will likely mostly be connected to our transmission system. Renewables, which will be a mix of solar, mostly in and around the Tucson area, and an additional wind resource, which there's great wind, in and around the system to the east, and another 1,400 megawatts of energy storage to help manage the intermittencies of the renewable, help ensure we maintain system reliability. So in conjunction with the additional renewables as we move forward, we're looking at retirements of most all of our coal plants, in the Springerville, Four Corners, San Juan area, some additional local generation as well in the load pocket. So as you can imagine, that's a concern of ours from a reliability standpoint. Putting a lot of time on the front end, similar to what you guys are identifying right now with your research and the findings, taking that proactive approach and identifying, okay, what are those challenges? What are those issues? Let's study them. Let's identify them. Let's resolve them up front. And in that way, as we move forward with integrating, we can ensure reliability. We can ensure customer satisfaction, which that's been a big thing that's come out of a lot of this this effort is ensuring that, okay, we're integrating the resources the customers are looking for, we're integrating them reliably, and so on. So you know, it translates up and down on what we're looking at here. Okay, so getting into the interconnection requirement side of things, I've been heavily involved in this over the years, and I was really happy to see that this was something identified on your end to tackle and to address up front, and I think it's just imperative. We did this in the state a little before I started getting involved in the 2006-2007 timeframe. A big group of stakeholders got together from the utility, from the industry, with our commission, had some workshops, identified some requirements and processes, and everybody took off running. Right, we started. You know, we started integrating projects, we started interconnecting them, we started learning, but that process was never really finished. So it was all left in draft form, and you know, us utilities in the state started kind of going our own direction, not in a bad way, but you know, those documents were never finalized, and that becomes a bit of a challenge for the regulators. You know, there were a little bit of inconsistent approach across the state from a utility perspective. It's also a challenge for the customers and the installers. You know, they're looking to build these facilities as efficiently as possible. It's costly to build these systems. The financials are usually pretty tight, and they've got to stay lean and efficient. And if TEP versus the other utilities in the state are requiring different things, and they've got to install equipment multiple times, it's really a challenge for the installers and ultimately the prosumer, as you guys put it. So I think that's a critical step that can't be missed. We've recently just, you know, we spent 2018 and 19 in workshops again to finalize our new interconnection requirements. And we, you know, you look back at it, and maybe we by not finalizing it early, we benefited from a lot of change in the industry, a lot of new technologies, and a lot of learnings in the industry on how much DG we can integrate, on how best to do it. But we finally got there. We finally approved at the state level a set of standardized interconnection requirements. And so we have a number of safety requirements in there, a whole bunch of processes and procedures. You mentioned timing. You know, there's requirements for both the utility and the customer to meet, and that's key for keeping projects moving, ensuring that they get integrated safely. So a couple of things I just want to mention real quickly, things that seemed obvious to us on the front end that weren't quite clear on the installer and customer end. So something to spend some time talking about is the need for certain safety equipment. So at TEP, we require a utility disconnect switch for every installation, small or big. We also require a export DG production meter. So what we want to do is we want to monitor the production of every facility so we can integrate that information into our system operations and our planning processes. That's a key aspect of proper integration, is just getting that data. So that you got the data coming in, and then labeling of all the key equipment. So the service entrance panel, this represents, you know, maybe a larger residential facility. But what the other thing we wanted to accomplish was making this repeatable, consistent, and build safety into this installation for our service crews who are out there working on the system day in and day out. So if they did have to respond to this facility, they've got that disconnect switch to isolate them from the DG source. All the labeling is installed very consistently across the board. And now this is just another part of our system, essentially, right? And very easy for them to maintain and operate and maintain safety. Another key aspect of integrating renewables from a safety perspective is mapping. This is something we did early on and worked with our GIS team, our Geographical Information System team, to build in a way to identify and track these DG sources. And so I'll try to zoom in here because it was a little hard to get on the presentation here, but this is just a small little cut of our distribution system in an area that has really adopted distributed generation. So it's just the orange line here represents our main feeder overhead along this road, and then we come in underground into the neighborhood. But what you can see is you can see these little suns at each service point. And so this allows us, as an application is made, we automatically generate this new sun, half sun on the system, and it allows us to map systems properly. We also include the system capacity here. And what's key about that is we're able to query this system as operators, as planners, even a lot of our business units use this information and determine, okay, how much DG is connected. What my group's worried about all the time is how much DG is connected by feeder, so we can run proper system studies. And so that's really, I think, critical information as you look to move forward to integrating additional renewables. Is you got to start with that data, like I mentioned, and now being able to visualize it. Where is it coming in? How do I operate it? How do I get that information easily into my studies? Because you don't want to have to manually input this data all the time. It's hard enough just modeling all of these distribution feeders with all of the different devices and DG resources. So I think those are two big things we've learned along the way that's helped us integrate DG. So real quick, so a couple things just real quick to mention. You guys have already identified it, so I won't spend too much time here, but as the saturation of distributed generation grows on a feeder, that circuit is not going to operate how it originally did. So protection settings at the substation, at reclosers along the line, voltage regulators out on the circuit, those original settings aren't going to work. And so you're going to have to identify how to modify them for backfeed. In many cases, what we've done is just block our voltage regulators for backfeed. So we're not compensating for voltage when there's enough DG downstream and enough DG obviously to backfeed through the voltage regulator back to the sub. So that's something we just came upon along the way. We weren't really monitoring that too closely, and we got power quality complaints because of it. So something that needs to have an active approach to maintain your industry standards for voltage. Real quick, a couple other things to mention. LTC settings, obviously, managing voltage becomes a different. You'd have to take some different approaches once you get some higher saturated feeders. And I can give you an example. We have a little over 400 distribution circuits, and 16 of them are at or above 100% solar at certain times of the year. And so, during the summer, when loads are very high, temperatures are very high, over 40 C, loads are high, it's not that big of a deal. But during the light load periods of time, like today's going to be, we can see a lot of solar generation, a lot of backfeed to the sub, and so managing voltage becomes much more dynamic. And so that's something that we're in a few cases on our system, we're finding that these traditional devices that we've relied upon for years to manage voltage just aren't cutting it. They're not fast enough. They're not, they're not precise enough to manage the inverter-based resource. And so we're researching and studying right now, installing some distribution static bar compensators, and so that's something that's brand new for us, but seems like we need, to properly continue to integrate these resources, we need to look at new technologies. Just real quick, the larger systems, I can let you know, I saw in some of the questions and the comments in the presentations about classifying different system sizes, that's another a great step. And we, you know, what we've done is as the systems grow in size, the protection requirements also grow. And so I'd say somewhere around a megawatt or above, which we don't have a tremendous number of those on the prosumer side of things, but we implement additional SCADA and transfer trip, direct transfer trip functionality to maintain reliability. So what we don't want to see is these larger systems actually islanding in and continuing to operate and feeding into that circuit or into that island when we have an issue at the substation. And so that's something else to consider. We've found that it can be pretty costly for us to do. And so sometimes that's a tough conversation with the customer, but something that's necessary to maintain proper reliability. Okay, one quick last thing on DGIRs. So something that we found that was extremely helpful from a process standpoint, from a customer satisfaction standpoint, was to we implemented a web-based interconnection process and application. Before, it was all emails and paper-based and really very little insight on the customer's end as to what we were up to and where their project was in the process. And by taking this step, it really brought a lot of insight to the customer and the installer. They know exactly where they're at in the process. They know what they need to provide us. It's a very easy platform to communicate with the customer. And so as you move forward with integrating additional DG, this is something to consider. It'll definitely pay for itself on the utility end, just in man hours. But that customer satisfaction piece, I think, really puts it over the top as something that's important to think about. And you can see here, this is just a screenshot of our web portal. We've partnered with PowerClerk for our system here. Okay, so shifting gears now, talking a little bit more on the rates regulatory side, which I have a little less experience on, but give you a little history on where we started and where we're at today. So back in 2006, our Corporation Commission adopted what we call the Renewable Energy Standard Tariff. And what that consisted of in 2006 was requiring all regulated utilities in the state to provide 15% of our retail energy from renewables. So at the time, we were very heavily coal and gas oriented utility. And this was a step in 2006, looking at almost 20 years to say, okay, in 20 years, utilities, we'd like to see 15% energy from renewables. So that could be wind, it could be solar, it could be biomass, and any of those types of technologies. And similar to what was mentioned by Stefan, there was a carve out identified for, again, just aligning, I call it DG, but for 30% of the renewable generation to come from the prosumer. So out of that 15%, there's about a third of it that should come from the customer side. And at the time, the market was very expensive to build a renewable facility. The material, the work practices, everything was very costly. And so our commission identified that, okay, we're going to have to incent this to some extent to encourage the adoption. So that's what they did. There was upfront incentives. There was performance-based incentives that were paid through the utilities. So moving forward, talking about, so that's kind of that standard that was set by the state. Talking about another incentive that you've identified as net metering. Nate, our commission adopted net metering rules, and they were full retail net metering. So findings is that's a way to incent them, incent the adoption of DG. But it's also, well, so So moving on from up to the commission and implement get our tariff approved. So what we went with was similar to what was identified by the commission as full retail net metering, and allowed the customers to essentially bank any excess generation that they produce throughout the day for consumption at other times. So essentially using our system as the storage for their renewable generation. And then each year, I believe it was October, we would kind of cash them out, right? So and then after that year transpired, we would pay out on, not at the retail level, but at the marginal or wholesale rate. So moving on from there, over time, the cost of solar has decreased. Federal incentives and state incentives have adjusted some, but are still there. And so over time, there's no longer a need to heavily incent the upfront cost of these facilities. So the incentives were reduced over time and phased out, years ago in 2013 or 14 from what I recall. And then around 2017, the commission identified, well, have the costs come down far enough to where maybe net metering doesn't need to be as much of an incentive as it is. So they opened a docket to research this. And so they brought in, again, great stakeholder process, bring in industry experts, bring in utilities, bring in, experts on the commission end. And they had a lot of conversation, spend a lot of time discussing how should we identify and potentially modify net metering. So they issued what we call the value of solar decision, and it modified our net metering rules from earlier, which was full retail net metering, so that full 1-for-1 credit, and reduced it. And it's really based on the cost of utility scale solar facilities. And so the way the new net metering rules work and how we operate today is those get evaluated each year and are projected to decrease over time on an annual basis. And I think that's another key thing to think about is anytime you make these big adjustments, doing them consistently, doing them with a lot of transparency and a lot of discussion with all the stakeholders is important, because anytime these incentives are decreased or changed, that's a change for the customer, for the installer, for the financial consideration on their end. And so today, to give you a perspective, we're on the residential end on average, I'll say 11 to 12 cents per kWh cost for energy in Tucson. And again, that's just an average number. Our value of solar number here, so our essentially our new net metering rate is about 8.6 cents. So it's come down, right? It's come down about a quarter from what it used to be. It's projected to decrease over time, but again, the calculation's based on what it would really cost to build a utility scale facility. So it's not going to go to zero. It's just going to decrease over time as those facilities get built. And here, just last note, we started that in 2018. So 2018 was the first time we had a reduction from that 1-for-1 net metering rate. It was again reduced in 19, and this year we've held steady for 2020 at that 8.6 cents. So I think that does it for me. I cruised through that pretty quick to hopefully keep us on time here. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of our experiences. It's been an exciting decade or so integrating renewables, and we're not done. We're just going to keep moving forward, and it's exciting to hear that everybody's interested in this in your area and looking to, like I said, identify what are those issues. Let's identify them. Let's resolve them, and let's ensure we can make this happen safely, reliably, affordably. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for making an excellent presentation from a utility who has gone through what the utilities in Southeast Europe and other areas of the world are probably just starting to go through. So your expertise is very well received by the attendees. So thank you. I want to turn it over now to Charlie Bayless. Bayless is going to moderate the Q&A. Several questions or numerous questions have come in during the presentations. Charlie is a former CEO of Illinois Power and Tucson Electric Power. He helped us recruit Chris for this webinar. And Charlie has been a good friend of USEA over the years and is a considered widely respected expert in the energy industry. I'm going to turn it over to Charlie.
Thank you, Albert. I was just sitting here thinking that the last overseas trip I made was to Skopje last fall. And it seems that since then I've been sitting at home. Not since then, I made a few in the United States. I just want to say a couple of things before we open it up to questions. One of the ways I describe, look, I am chair of an organization called the Climate Institute. I'm a climate nut. We've got to get rid of carbon. But going to renewables at high levels is not easy. And the farther up you go, the harder it gets. I liken it to having, if you have an Airbus 320 and somebody tells you that you've got to change it to a fighter jet in flight, it's pretty hard. And you not only have to design the controls, but the aircraft body itself is not stressed for 5G turns and things like that. That's what we're up against. Chris has gone through a lot of them in Tucson. A good friend of, another guy that used to work at Tucson Electric that Chris and I know is Jeff Martin, who's now the CEO of a large energy company called Sempra, which has owned several utilities, but one of them is San Diego Gas and Electric, which is in California. And I was talking to Jeff and his new CEO, or the CEO of San Diego. Sempra is the holding company, Carolyn Wynn. And they told me that within just a couple of years, they expected to be exporting energy at the time of their peak load, because their peak is highly coincident with their solar. And that San Diego has more clouds. Tucson doesn't do clouds, as Chris knows. I think we have something like 11 cloudy days a year there. A typical summer temperature is like 42, 43, and areas in one part of Arizona, it's been over 50. So, and there's no water vapor in the atmosphere either to attenuate the sunlight. So it's great for solar. But San Diego is also very bright and sunny. And whereas downtown San Diego isn't, the surrounding area is the Mojave Desert and things like that. So just think about that. Exporting energy in San Diego, Chris may know, but it's got to be what, 20,000 megawatts or something like that. I mean, 20,000 megawatts. I don't know their exact peak, but it's a big utility. So we need to look at this. And as we mentioned in Skopje, there's a lot of things that Chris mentioned, like voltage regulation totally goes to pot. Your relay protection schemes, you have backfeed into them, aren't designed to do that. So you have to redesign the whole system. And it's interesting, it can be done. Stefan mentioned that you need to look at where you want to get. And that's critical as we design the system. What you have to do is go out and say, okay, what's the system going to look like if we get up to 30, 40, 50% renewables? And start now. Don't start to design it for 5%, because you're just going to have to redesign it to get to 15%. And then you're going to have to redesign it again to get to 30% and so forth. So take a longer view and look at that. So anyway, I'm going to go through some of the questions, and anybody that wants to chime in from the panel or anybody else can go. So I'll just read them, Albert. I mean, I think people can probably see them. But given the 11 key findings that Manea laid out, I see 4 sets of rules that the regulatory authorities would need to develop or revise: rate design, net metering, distribution interconnection, incentive-based regulation. Any others? Anybody want to comment on that? I can say a few things about that. Net metering is critical. If you look at what we are selling a customer, we are selling a customer not only energy, we're selling them reliability. We're selling them frequency control, voltage control, 24/7. You flip the switch and it's on. What they're selling us is electricity when available. And it's very unreliable. It's a far different product they're selling us than what we're selling them. I've joked, if you want to know what, look, and I'm a nut on climate, but if you want to know what their power is worth, go out and get yourself a gas turbine and put a little sensor on top of it, a little photometer that will look when the sun's out. So the gas turbine only runs when the sun is out. And then go to all your neighbors in all the Balkans and go into Europe, I don't care, and say, okay, we'll sell this on the market. What's it worth? But you only get it. It's only going to run when the sun is out. You're going to find out it's not worth much. So it's ludicrous to buy that power for the cost of our power, which includes all those other things of transmission, distribution, voltage, our support for voltage, frequency control, et cetera, the ability to ramp up and down. And so I think what Chris went through at TEP, they started with full retail net metering. And it was a problem too, because what happened is all the wealthy people got it, ran their electric bills to zero, and all the cost was shifted to the not wealthy people. So it's not a very good social program if you're trying to help people that need it. But anyway, so net metering, getting the rules correct. You want to get them enough to incent net metering, and the same is true for feed-in tariffs. Both Spain and Ontario tried very high feed-in tariffs. Ontario incurred over $1 billion of unnecessary cost, and they had the whole government fell because of it. They sent a feed-in tariff that was 60 cents, 60 US cents, 60 Canadian cents, which is about the same as a US cent per kilowatt hour, and they just got killed. So anyway, the design is going forward, as Stefan was saying. You need to look at what it's going to be like at 30, 40, 50% in design for that. And it's not only the system technical design, it's the regulatory design. So does anybody else, Chris, Manea?
Let me jump in for a second, Charles, because there's a question in the question, which I find very interesting.
Okay.
And it says, set the rules that the SE national regulatory authorities would need to develop or revise if rules currently exist. I don't think that now they all independently have to develop, since we do have something. And this is the policy guidelines by the Energy Community Secretariat on the integration of renewable self-consumers. And it's the third paper, I think, very actually from September 2020. And luckily, most of our recommendations are also implemented in this paper. So I would not advise the authorities to reinvent the wheel again and again. They have a big advantage with the developed countries. They have already developed something, and let's try to copy and paste best standards and adapt them where it's necessary. But reinvention or development of the strategies or policies will take by far too long, because the journey has already started, to say with this little cinema. If you allow me, Charles, I found an interesting question here on the screen from Elliot Roseman, which I want to answer as well, and then I stay quiet, promise?
Go right ahead.
What do the panelists think about how much the addition of distributed renewables could reduce production from lignite and other fossils generation over time to meet EU carbon targets? Has there been any analysis of this in Southern East Europe? Could it be perhaps the next study? So first of all, again, we can look just a little bit north, maybe to Austria, where I come from, but better to Germany. what Germany did with the Energiewende is precisely that. They jumped out of the production of lignite or black coal and other fossil generations as well, and even from nuclear, not to forget nuclear here on this stage as well. So I would say, is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Was it done excellent by the German Republic? I would say no, because they started the way before all participants gathered together. So there were different speeds during this way. The production got in first place. Afterwards, they find out the transmission cannot do and the distribution cannot follow as well. So this shows us that we can do the German example even the better, we can even improve. But the goal clearly has to be a fossil-free production. What you said, Charles, of course, is very correctly. Then we have gas. Gas is fossil fuel as well, but with less emissions than coal-fired power plants. And by that, the green gas, it's even called. And it's necessary as a primary reserve whenever you don't have hydro. Now, in Southern Eastern Europe, we are in a lucky position that we have a lot of hydro, but if it can substitute completely fossils, depends a little bit, I would say. Could it be an analysis for the Southeast Europe? We do have an analysis done by the government, supported by the British government, for North Macedonia, and there is 3 scenarios. One is the Green Deal scenario, which shows this very actively. And would it be perhaps the next study? Good idea.
Okay, thank you. Let me read the next question here. It seems while the technology is developed to manage the distributable energy resources, DSO training will be vital. Any opinions? Yeah, my opinions, you're absolutely right. You've got to, again, you take the A320 pilot and put them in an F-16, they probably can land it, but they're not going to be proficient in it. And so you definitely need that, and you guys are doing it right. Everybody has to coordinate. In the United States, we've had that because we have what we call the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We have an overriding, not an overriding, but another body called NERC. NERC stands for National Electric Reliability Council. It used to be North American. It's Canada and the US. And so they set forth the system, operating parameters and the set points. You've all got to set everything. You got to get all your set points on different things the same, the slopes on all the settings the same, or you're going to get you will discover some interesting feedback problems as things start oscillating from flipping from this to that. So I would say training is vital. Does anybody want to? I noticed a lot of shaking heads when I said that.
Yeah, Charlie, I'll add something to that just real quickly. I think it's training at many levels. So it's not just the crews in the field. I mean, that's critical, right? But it's training for them. It's training for the operators. It's training for the engineers. It's across the board in the organization. It's training for the customer service reps who are answering the phones and helping the customers. Making sure, I mean, it's a shift. It's a big change in how business is done, and now, now you're reaching into on the prosumer end into the customer side of things, and they expect you to be knowledgeable. So I think that's a great point and acknowledgement that's needed. But I'd say it's almost every level of the organization.
Yeah, another thing that's critical is modeling. You've got to model a lot more. I've often said that the difference between the old system and the new was the old system, we had 4 1,000 megawatt elephants, and now we have 1,000 4 megawatt cats. And it's much harder to model. But Chris knows this, and just believe me, Tucson went through it. When you get feeder circuits that literally can have net flow back, you get all the batteries. Batteries are critical if you're going to go to high levels of DGs because they can smooth out the variability. And they can also store energy. You know, we've always known they can store energy at low price periods for high price periods, but they can also smooth out the variability. Energy price isn't the only thing you're looking at. It's voltage and frequency and everything else so you can store. But developing the modeling simultaneously with everything else is critical. Stefan, you looked like you were going to say something there when I started talking where you were.
Sorry, I just wanted to add what Chris said. It's absolutely right, but not to forget to train the customer, the prosumer as well. Also, he needs appropriate training, and it is our responsibility to do that. Otherwise, he gets expectations, and that might be wrong expectations, and then you're in the circle, which circle?
Right. All right, let me go on down through here a little bit. We've done this a second ago. If a DSO installs a solar plant and consumes all the production at the spot, so simultaneously or in a net metering system, can it be treated as a prosumer? Yeah.
Yeah, may I comment? It depends where the solar is installed. If it is behind the meter, for example, if it's on the building of the headquarters of the DSO, and it's used to cover the consumption of this building, and because this electricity meter has a supplier, and then the DSO is a prosumer and it's all right. But if it's being integrated into some transformer station and there is no electricity meter and covers, for example, the losses of this transformer also, then this is not the prosumer, because the losses should be procured on the electricity market, and producing it by the solar panel is maybe not the cheapest way to do so. So it should be behind the meter, in my opinion, and some suppliers should be engaged at this electricity meter. And then we can say that this is the prosumer.
Thank you. You know, another thing we talked about modeling and we talked about regulation. Another thing that Chris brought up on like his first slide is the standards. As Stefan said, you've got to look out 10 years. You've got to look at what's it going to take us to go up to 30, 40, whatever % and set the standards. You have standards, for instance, that you look at short circuit ratios, and you got to look at short circuit ratios of the solar that's being installed and look at the voltage parameters on each of the little distribution systems, so that, you can go ahead and install it if it meets this parameter. So, I mean, it really, basically, Stefan said this, you've got to know where you're going and how you're going to get there before you just start installing things. And it's not only just the net metering and the rates, it's the system design and the standards, and you really need a package, which is what we're talking about today. But that's critical. You leave out one of those and you could run into problems. Okay. What are the policy and technical issues that prohibit customers from islanding their system when central power facilities have outages?
So, Charlie, I can just mention a couple things how we'd handle something like this. What we require, I'll say, is if there is an outage on one of our feeders, that DG system disconnect from our grid, and that's the requirement. So it doesn't mean it can't continue to operate with, say, an energy storage system, a battery connected to it, and then it automatically transfers, or there's some kind of manual transfer of that generator to then feed the customer's load. That's okay, as long as all of that equipment's inspected and inspected correctly and tested. So we will let a system island and just operate in its own little island, producing energy and supplying it just to that facility, we'll say, as long as it's disconnected from our our system at the time. But that automatic disconnection from the grid when there is a circuit outage, that's required for all systems, whether it's renewable, whether it's rotating machine. You know, we have plenty of customers with backup generation, or even some, you know, gas units that are tied in here as well. So we will, like I said, we will allow that system to island as long as it's disconnected from our distribution system.
Yeah, and let me point out again, that's where modeling and we discover new things as we go forward. We're finding out a lot of things. One modeling, there was a fire in California, oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And there was, there've been a lot of fires in California. And so the smoke caused a short circuit. I think it was a 345. It could have been a 138 line, where the smoke caused a short circuit. So the two lines that short circuited together, in highly technical terms, the phase was pulled together at that point. And so the system viewed that as an increase in frequency on one phase and a decrease on the other phase. And we lost like 1,000 megawatts of solar power because the solar inverters all tripped off on under frequency. So the system healed itself and cleared the fault. Okay, we cleared the fault immediately on the transmission system. So again, this is the thing, everything has to be coordinated together. We've since tried to fix that, but I'm sure we're going to discover more and more things as we go forward. Yeah, islanding, one of the things that we're looking at in the United States now, I'm on the board, we have a sort of an island. It's not a state, it's a territory, but it's, everybody there is basically has the same rights as any other US citizens. You get a US passport, et cetera, called Puerto Rico. And it's down near Cuba, it's in the Caribbean. It's a great place to go to in the winter. It's a great place to go to anyway. But that island, we had the grid flattened, and I mean flattened, by 2 Category 5 hurricanes in 1 week. And literally on some of the transmission towers that were literally a couple of 220,000 volts stayed up, but it blew the wires off of them. It was that bad. We had people out of power for 6 months. So we're looking at a series of microgrids. Siemens is working hard on this, and a lot of other people. But each of those microgrids is going to have its own logic, its own controller. And so that microgrid will look at everything in the system. It'll look at the air conditioners, it'll look at the furnaces, the stoves, the solar generation, the batteries, and optimize that. And then when the grid looks at it, it just sees that whole microgrid as one object. It doesn't need to see what's going on in there. It just sees, okay, this grid, and this grid is offering to buy at 2.7 cents per kilowatt hour, and they'll sell at 3.3, and they have 50 megawatts to buy, and they want to buy, or whatever. And so that makes it easier. But again, it's one of these things where everything has to work together, and it's going to be an incredible modeling job. Here's another question. I understand there is no bankability in the new system. So is the excess energy calculated hourly? Well, let me just say that that's where batteries come in, is you can't have bankability, and it's almost, if you get up to high levels, you're going to need that. In California now, where San Diego and Los Angeles and everybody is, they install gas turbines that are, I forget what frame or what they are, but they're like 200 megawatt gas turbines. But they also have a 200 megawatt 600 megawatt hour or something battery. And when the frequency decreases by whatever the set point is, the battery immediately comes on. And then the gas turbine ramps up, and I think it's got like a 10 or 11 or 12 minute ramp. It's on hot standby. And then as the gas turbine comes up, the battery goes down to keep the system stable. But anyway, does anybody want to talk about, is excess energy calculated hourly if there's no bankability? In other words, how do you, Chris, I mean, a TEP, when you're looking at net metering, is it an hourly? I mean, do you do it minute by minute, second by second? I mean, if you had real-time rates that were fluctuating minute by minute in the limit, how would you calculate excess energy? Is it on an hourly basis, a daily, or what? You know?
Yeah, we haven't gotten that sophisticated yet. I believe the new export rate is calculated on a monthly basis. But yeah, we do meter all of the consumption, production, I believe at a 15-minute standpoint. So that's how we're doing our calculations. At least at that smaller scale, you know, when things get very large, that's a different story. But we've kept it relatively simple. Again, it was a big shift from retail net metering to our new export rate, and so that I don't know what a good way to say it. You know, when you make those big changes, it's kind of shocking to the industry, and so there's been a big desire to smooth those out. So I could see as we, you know, you look way into the future, there could be some major changes from a market standpoint, you know, if that's what's really going to start driving things. But as we sit today, that's what it looks like.
Okay. I think that's all the questions we have on. Wait,
Charles,
go ahead, Stefan.
Yeah, Charles, Albert, the participants are very patient with us. I think we are over the time, but it's not my role. But I want to have one final remark because there is an interesting question. Are the recommendations affordable? And I think we have to answer this, and Minia can help me by that as well, probably. But I said, they have to be. There is no other way. They have to be affordable because we are already gone. We have left, the train has left the station. It cannot be pulled back anymore. So they have to be affordable. Otherwise, we are talking about the nasty word of blackout. But it's not so much about the price increase. It is more about the cost reflectivity. We're talking about fixed versus variable costs. Grid costs are mainly fixed costs. What is important to recognize at that point of the life cycle, the grid sells a capacity, not the energy. And by that, the costs have to be based on the capacity. And this transformation has to be done immediately and very fast with the tariff change.
Thank you. Well, you're right. We are over the time, but I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to put Minea on the spot. Minea, if you had to pick the 2 or 3 biggest hurdles that you see to getting to high levels of renewables in the Balkans, what would they be? Of all the regulatory, technical, political, anything, what do you think the 2 or 3 biggest hurdles that we've got to work on to overcome are?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think that we have to work coordinately to achieve the goals technically, economically optimal for the region. Now we speak about the DSO issues, but you know, actually we have a climate goals that we have to achieve, and we have to work closely and coordinately to achieve that. This is not an easy task to do because there is no history and past experience so that we can copy and say this is the way we have to go, and every country is a different situation, so they have to do all what can do to find their optimal way. There is no way that could be copied for each country in the region due to different resources and starting position. But what we are talking about, if we focused only on the DSOs, definitely we will do our technical part, and we will do it the best way we can do, but we cannot do it without this regulatory part. This is why so much emphasis today has been put on the regulatory part, even though it's not the only task that should be done. We know that we also should be supporting this movement with renewables, and we will try to do our best. but we have to get the support from the ministries, from the policymakers. By this I mean the policymakers, and from the regulatory part. For example, if I speak about net metering, we are think that this actually aggravates the problems with the DSOs, but okay, if it's necessary, then try to limit to small sizes so that impact on the grid and excess power they are feeding back to the grid is somehow limited. And this is something that we do not see here in the region because these limits in capacities are high as 500 kilowatts. We think that it should be 10 kilowatts so that really this energy that is produced is consumed locally behind the meter. And by introducing some additional charges for the prosumers when they are feeding back to the grid, we try to actually prevent this oversizing, because if they will be forced to pay something for the excess power, then probably we will not feed back to the grid. And or at least they will be somehow incentivized to install the storages when the costs get lower. So this is what we are talking about. We know that this is not an easy task to this transition to higher demand charges, because this is also the problem that will aggravate the energy affordability to customers that consume less, and also undermines the energy efficiency measures and so on. But there should be some certain point of trade-off. What we are suggesting, try thinking about it, let's start analyzing what can be done. We know that it's not an easy task to do, and that's something that there is an optimal solution to solve this issue, so to say, and challenges. But let's just try to start with this analysis and try to find the best way that will be optimally for the region. Thank you.
Albert, I'll give it back to you if you want. And there was a question, is the presentation going to be available that you and or Manea can handle?
Yeah, I want to first, I just want to thank everybody for all of the excellent presentations and discussion this morning. I know we ran a little over time, but I know that this discussion was of high interest and I didn't want to interrupt it. And I thank everyone's patience for staying online. All of the presentations and a recording of the webinar today will be on the USDA website. And also the position paper that was presented will be on the USDA website. So once again, thank you to all of the speakers. One thing I would like to echo is Stefan Peters said, don't reinvent the wheel. Well, that's why we're trying to share best practices among each other. So, and hopefully this is helping other utilities. And I just want to say thank you once again to all of our speakers and for the excellent presentation. Thank you very much. So goodbye.
Bye.